Thank you all very much for coming along this morning. It's so great to see so many of you interested in SharePoint development at this hour of the morning. I'm just really thankful that I wasn't on Wednesday morning after the attendee party. It's a tough slot in the morning, and you all look pretty bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to talk about some SharePoint development. So let's get started. My name's Chris Johnson. I'm a program manager on the Windows SharePoint Services team, and I focus on developer-focused aspects of our product. We call it the application platform team. So we're basically the meat between the UI team and the storage and infrastructure team. So we deal with all of the APIs and all of the programmability aspects of SharePoint. And so today we're going to be talking about the Visual Studio extensions for WSS to help you build out applications for SharePoint. Hands up those of you who currently use the Visual Studio extensions for WSS. Hard to say, probably a little under 50%. Excellent. We're going to have one slide on an introduction to the Visual Studio tools, just for those of you who haven't ever used them before. And then we're going to dig in for probably 45 minutes into an application building exercise. So rather than just digging through in particular features, we're actually going to go ahead and build out an entire application to show the extensions in full effect. And so as I say, we have a few slides up front to talk about the extensions, to walk through the solution that we're going to build, and then we'll spend the rest of the session building it out. So VSE WSS is the acronym for the Visual Studio extensions for WSS. We're currently at version 1.2, which is the Visual Studio 2008 version. 1.1 is functionally the same, but runs for Visual Studio 2005. We came from 1.0 a wee while ago and recently released 1.2. It consists of two parts. The first part is the Visual Studio add-in itself, and the second part is a utility program called the Solution Generator. So the Visual Studio add-in adds a bunch of project and item templates to Visual Studio that allow you to help build out SharePoint applications. We cover things like web parts, site definitions, list definitions, event receivers, and so on. And we'll touch many of those in the application building exercise later on. But probably the main use of the extensions is really the ability for them to assist you with packing all that stuff up into our WSP solution package format. And so when you're working away in Visual Studio, you can add these assets to your project, and then as you do your build and deploy, it'll pack all that stuff up for you. And we have the WSP view in Visual Studio, which allows you to structure your WSP package how you wish. And we'll look at that too. Now, typically, one of the more tricky aspects to SharePoint development in the past has been the sort of disconnect between the regular Visual Studio world and the SharePoint world. And the VSE WSS extensions try to bring those two together. So for example, we have an F5 debug, deploy, and build experience that's very similar to how you would work in any other .NET application. The Solution Generator is a little utility that we ship that allows you to build out your SharePoint application in, say, SharePoint Designer or through the web UI, and then almost reverse engineer that into a Visual Studio project. And so that's really good for rapid prototyping, or if you want to figure out how something's built, then you can build it out in the web UI and build it out in SharePoint Designer and make your customizations, and then use the Solution Generator to bring that into Visual Studio and see how it was done. Then you can pick and choose parts of that, move them into other solutions, or you can go ahead and use that as your entire solution. So what are we going to build out today? Well, we're going to walk through the extensions in a number of different ways. We're going to add a bunch of different things to a Visual Studio project to help build out a fully fledged application. And the way we're going to do that is focus on this fictitious company we all know and love, Contoso Pharmaceuticals. And they want to build out a sales forecasting application. They currently have an ASP.NET application that they use for recording sales information for their various products. And they want to sort of extend that out a little bit more to include forecasting details. They want to allow their staff to go into this application and say, hey, for this quarter and this year and this particular product, I think we're going to sell 50 units of this particular product. They want to merge that data with their existing sales data from their line of business tool, which is this ASP.NET application. So right now, as you see on the screen, we have this screenshot on the right-hand side that just shows a very rudimentary sales application that they use to manage customers' orders, order lines, and products. And that backs onto a SQL Server database. And as I said, what they'd really like to do is to be able to capture this information in a sales forecasting tool that, say, they may do in Excel today, so that they can collaborate on that data, share it with other people, and visualize that data in much nicer ways. So when we focus on building this application, we're going to focus on building it out in 5 different ways. Our user requirements from Contoso Pharmaceuticals are around design, integration, extension, socialization, and visualization. So for design, we're obviously going to add some branding to our SharePoint site to make it look a little nicer than the out-of-the-blocks blue template that we give you. We're going to integrate some of that sales order application into our SharePoint environment. We're going to extend SharePoint in a number of different ways to build out our forecasting capability. And we're going to allow people to discuss and collaborate on forecasts using some social type functionality in SharePoint around wikis. And then finally, we're going to get into some visualization of this data and help bring an aggregated type view of sales and actual sales data and forecast sales data using some Silverlight and these kinds of things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take that existing ASP.NET application and just surface it in SharePoint. There are a number of ways of doing this. We're going to choose one of these ways, but we'll discuss additional ways that you could do this as we go through the build. The second part of the solution design is around the extending of SharePoint. So we're going to add a forecast list and some forecast content type with some fields on it to be able to capture our forecast data. And we're also going to add a forecast wiki to allow people to go and discuss those particular forecasts. And we're going to link them all together in a nice way that makes it easy for users. So really, once we add these extensions into our SharePoint site, what we're really saying is add these pieces down the bottom of the list and content type and wiki and so on, and then allow us to get to that data, the sales data, through some WCF web services that we're also adding. And then finally, we're going to use the forecast. We're going to build up a forecast graph control that allows us to aggregate that data, pull the data from the WCF web service for the sales information, aggregate it with the forecast data from the SharePoint list that people will be entering, and show them in a nice sort of Silverlight using the new graphing controls. Okay, so now let's move on to the build portion of the talk. I'd just like to acknowledge Intergen, they're a gold partner of ours, who have helped us build out this application, and thank you very much for that. Okay, so I'll switch over to our machine here, and let's get started. Let me just log in, hold on a moment. Okay. Okay, so what we have here is I've just created a team site and stripped off the default web parts off the home page. And this is the website that we're going to use to extend, brand, integrate, those kinds of things. So you'll see this evolve as we go through the demo. Now we're actually going to split the demo up into 5 parts. Let me just switch back here for a moment. Those same 5 parts that we talked about earlier, we're going to do in the demo, and we're going to come up for air after each part. So the first part is adding the design. So for this, we're going to, I already have created a theme project in Visual Studio that has a bunch of CSS and images and those kinds of things in a Visual Studio Extensions project. We're going to walk through that, show you how it's built up, and then we're going to apply that to the site and see how it reflects it. Okay, so Visual Studio over here, I have Contoso Site Theme Project. And this is a Visual Studio Extensions for WSS project. It has a couple of things inside it. It has some files and theme files, CSS files, and then in the underscore layouts folder here, we have a whole bunch of images that help make up part of this theme. So there are two things that are being used here. For those who aren't familiar with the Visual Studio Extensions for WSS, there are a bunch of project item templates that you can add to your project, one of which is what we call a template file. And so those go into this templates folder over in the Solution Explorer over here. Now what those are, when you add these files, it'll deploy them into the templates directory in SharePoint in the particular subdirectory that you've chosen. So for example here, we have the layouts folder, 1033 images, and Contoso. We have a whole bunch of images in here. This will be deployed into the SharePoint file system when we deploy and add those files into SharePoint. The second thing that we have in this project is this CS file. And this is a feature receiver that when our feature is activated in SharePoint, it goes and applies this particular theme. So you can see here we just say web.apply theme and apply Contoso theme. And then down here, when we deactivate the feature, we flip back and we apply the none theme, which means we can remove the theme off the site. So what's going to happen is we're going to build this project, and when we deploy it, it's going to package all this up in a WSP for us, deploy it to SharePoint, activate it on our site, and then we'll go to the site and see what it does. Okay, so let's build, just to make sure we have it built here. And then we can deploy. Now, these are some custom actions that you may not have seen in a regular Visual Studio project. Obviously, build was there, but deploy is one particular to the extensions. And so this is the entry point for kicking off that build of the WSP and the deploy. So we'll say deploy here. So it takes all of those files and folders and so on and builds up that WSP for you. And if you want to see what goes on inside that WSP, you can flip over here to WSP view. And we have two projects in the solution already. Some of the others we're going to talk about in a minute. But the Contoso Site Theme project here, you can see it's got a manifest file and a whole bunch of folders and files under the templates folder here. And so these are all built automatically for you. You don't have to go and write all this XML yourselves. And you can also drag and drop features around in here and organize your WSP how you like. So I think our solution has been deployed. So if we flip back to our site and refresh here, we should see our branding applied. Are they trying to ring to find out how the demo's going? Okay, so we have our brand applied. Now, if you jump into Site Actions and go into Site Settings, we can go and see how this was deployed. If we go into Site Features here, we see we have this Contoso Site Theme feature that's been applied. And so we can deactivate and activate that feature however we like, or whenever we like, sorry. And that will go and apply and remove the theme of the site. And you saw we flipped back to the blue theme here. Let's go ahead and activate that feature. Okay, so that's... now just one quick note before we carry on. All of this demo content will be packaged up into a download for you that we'll post up on the SharePoint team blog. So if you're interested in getting all of these files and so on, you can go and we'll have that up in the next couple of days. So the next thing we're going to do is just integrate our existing sales orders application in SharePoint. Now there are a couple of ways you could do this, and to be honest, I'm going to take the easy way on this one. Now, I'm going to use the page viewer web part to surface an existing ASPX application inside of SharePoint, but you could equally spend the time to build out a custom web part to do this. We're going to look at a web part later on, so I didn't want to duplicate that. So we're just going to add a couple of things to this page in this web part zone here. We're going to say add a new page for your web part. And we're just going to point it at a page in our existing sales order application and just surface this. So this will give a way for our salespeople to come in and work with the product data. So let's jump into the properties for that web part and say Contoso Legacy Web products.aspx. So Contoso Legacy Web is the ASP.NET application that our sales order application is running under. And we're just going to set some properties on this web part to say it's particular height. And I don't want any Chrome for the web part. Exit edit mode. And so we're just surfacing this product page in SharePoint. So this is just an example of a really quick, sort of easy integration. If you can strip out the Chrome on a particular page from your legacy web application, you can surface it in SharePoint in a fairly easy way. And this is something you can do, reasonably quickly and easily without having to go to the effort to build out an entire web part that you may want to do later on. Okay. So let's jump back to our slides for a moment. So part one was the design. We looked at that. Part two was surfacing this legacy web application inside SharePoint. But part three is really where all the fun starts. So for part three, we're going to extend SharePoint in a few different ways. We're going to build out that forecast list. And to do that, we're going to need a content type for that list. And then on that list, we're also going to add an event handler to deal with events when somebody adds a forecast. So what we're going to do in that event handler is we're going to say, when somebody adds a forecast, we want to go and check our sales order information, see if the forecast that they've entered is within plus or minus 20% of a historical rolling average over that sales data. And if it is, then flag this forecast as an anomalous forecast so that it can be brought up and discussed and things like that. We're also going to use the event handler to set some additional properties on the forecast. We're going to automatically build up the title for that forecast and a couple of other properties that we'll look at. Okay, so let's flip back. So the first thing we're going to do is add a new Visual Studio Extensions project to our solution. So this is what we're going to do to add the definitions for our new forecast list and our content type and so on. And so here on the right, you can see the SharePoint node. So once you install the extensions, you'll get this node, this project type in Visual Studio. And inside there, you can see we have 5 different project templates you can pick from. Really, these are just starting blocks that you can start from. You're not bound to only having a list definition and the list definition project type, for example. You can go and add additional assets once you get going. But we're going to pick the empty project here and call this forecasting. And so we've just got this blank project here. And we're going to add a whole bunch of things to it. But first, what we want to do is add a reference to our WCF web services so that we can pull in some of that legacy data. We want to pull in our product names. We want to pull in sales order information. So the way we do that is by adding a service reference to our WCF service. Let's go and discover that. You can see we've got sales orders here, and there are 2 methods on this that we're going to use. Get products obviously gets all of the product names, and get product sales by quarter is we're going to use to pull in that sales data into our application. So let's call this sales orders. It's gone and it's building our reference to that sales order service. Won't be a moment. It's added some references for us, and now you can see the sales order service reference here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build out our list. And to do that, we need a couple of things. We need the content type that goes in the list. And one of the fields on that content type is going to be a product picker. So they can say, add a forecast for a particular product and in this quantity. And so we don't really want to duplicate the names of the products in SharePoint, say in a lookup list. We want to drag the product names from our WCF web service and populate them. So on our content type, we're going to add a new custom field type, which is going to be a drop-down field which at runtime goes to the WCF web service and grabs those product names. And so when we use the list, you'll see when we add a new item to the list, you'll see the rest of the fields, and you'll also see a drop-down with those product names. And those will be coming from the WCF web service. So the idea there is that we don't want to end up having to manage two sets of product names. We kind of have to do this in reverse. So first we have to create the fields, then we have to create the content type, and then we have to create the list. So the first thing we're going to do here is add a new field control. So the SharePoint node here on the left will show you all of the custom project item types that you can add to this project. So we have things like list definition and content type, web part, for example. And then over here on the right, we have field control. So we're going to create one of these, and we're going to call it products drop-down list. And we're going to add this. Let me just call it product. It's added some additional references for us, and now you can see that we have 3 files added to our project. We have this XML file here under the templates XML directory. This is a SharePoint XML file that registers our field with SharePoint. And then we have 2 additional CS files here, the one that ends in field.cs and the one that ends in fieldcontrol.cs. The fieldcontrol.cs file, that defines the rendering control that will be used for this field. And the field.cs file is the actual type. So we're building a custom field type here. So let's look at the XML here. And if I go into WSP view, I have to refresh this to build up this. It'll go in, pardon me. It'll go and add in the additional XML for our file here. And so by default, you can see the parent type there is a text field, but we don't want that. We want to make that a choice field, which is the equivalent of a drop-down in SharePoint. So we're going to change this to choice. Let's save that file there. And so this is the registration data that will be deployed into SharePoint, and will tell SharePoint what are the types and so on that I need to load for this particular field type. So let's exit out of there and take a look at fieldcontrol.cs. So here, again, it's added a text field by default. We want to make this into a choice field. So we can simply say drop-down choice field. Now we're not going to override any of the rendering of this control. We're happy with the choice that drop-down choice field gives us, which is just simply a regular drop-down list. If you wanted to override the rendering and so on, that's the class that you could do it in. And then in field.cs, we're going to add a bunch of code here that goes to that WCF web service, grabs all the product names, and then adds them to the choices collection for this drop-down field. So the first thing we're going to do here is just say we don't really want an SP text field. What we want here is a SP field choice object. And then we're going to add some code down the bottom of our file that goes and queries that WCF web service. So I'm going to drag in a snippet here and that we'll walk through that does this. So init choices is the method that we're going to call to go and grab the product names. And so all we need to do here is resolve a few references, obviously. All we need to do here is use the sales order client proxy that was generated and say get products on it. And so this is going to call that WCF web service. And then we're going to use a little bit of link here to query that collection that came back and add it to the choices property for this object. And so that's putting those items into the choices collection for the drop-down. So we need to do a couple of things here to make sure this compiles. We need to add a new reference to system.core for our link pieces that we're using. And we need to do a using statement up here to bring in our link namespace. And now let's see if this just builds, just to make sure. Okay. Now the last thing we need to do in here is we need to, in the constructors, we need to call that init choices method so that when this field is created, it goes and grabs those product names. So we'll say in here init choices. And then again in the second constructor, we'll do the same thing. So when our drop-down's created, it'll go and grab those product names and populate itself. Let's just make sure this builds, and then we'll move on to our content type. Okay, so now we have our drop-down field. Now we can go and create our content type that uses that drop-down. And so what we'll do is add a new project item to our project here. So we say add new item. And you can see here we have content type. So we're going to call this forecast. We say add. Now it also gives us a couple of options here. It says what would you like your base content type to be? So in SharePoint, content types are hierarchical. So they inherit from one another. And so we want to base our content type on the item content type. So this is the most basic of content types in SharePoint. It's the root level content type. And we also get an option here that says add with event receiver. So this will automatically add the event receiver code to your project that you can go and then fill out. And it'll wire it all up for you. So let's say OK here. And let's see what it's added for us. So it's created this forecast folder here. And inside it we have 3 files, the forecast XML file, the item event receiver, and the list event receiver code. So the forecast XML file is, again, it's some SharePoint XML that tells SharePoint this is the definition of the content type, this is what it's called, these are the fields, and so on. And then the CS files are the code files for the event receivers. And it's split into 2 files, so the list event receiver and the item event receiver. So we have 2 types of events in SharePoint. The item events are things that happen on the items in the list, obviously. And the list event receivers are for things that happen on the list, for example, adding or removing a column. So we're really interested in the item event receiver code. But first, let's jump into our forecast XML and take a look at that. So up the top, we have this content type node, which defines our content type, what it's called, and so on, the description for it. And then we have these commented areas down the middle and the bottom of the file, which define the fields that are going to go into our content type. So the first thing we need to do here is define what the fields on this content type are going to be. So for example, we want to capture the product name, we want to capture the forecast quantity, we want to capture the year and the quarter, for example. So let's drag in some field definitions for this and then walk through them. So we have a few fields here. We have our, let's go over to the names so we can see what they're called. So we have forecast product, quarter, year, quantity, anomaly, and start date. And so the user will fill out some of these, and our event receiver will fill out some of them. For example, the user will fill out forecast year. They'll pick the product name. They'll pick the quantity. And then we're going to automatically fill out the forecast start date and whether the forecast is an anomaly or not in our event receiver. So the forecast start date is really just is the first day of the month at the quarter of the quarter. And so you can see the first field up here is this product drop-down list field. So here we're defining a field that's our custom field that we just defined. And so that'll be added to this content type. The second thing that we need to do in this file, now we've defined the fields, is we need to reference them from our content type. So let's drag the field refs in here. And these are simply just references to the fields that we defined further down the file. Okay, so now we have our fields in our content type. Now we can go ahead and build our list. Now we have the content type that we're going to put in that list. So let's go and add a new item to this project. And we can say list definition from content type. So this is a way for you to create a list definition from a content type you've already defined. So let's call this forecast list. And say add. And again, it gives us an option to pick which content type we'd like to base this on. And so the extensions have gone into your project, looked at the content types you have defined, and offer a choice here. So we see our forecast content type is already an option here. And there is also an option to say, create an instance of this list when this feature is deployed. And what this will do is automatically go and create an instance of this list for you, so you don't have to go and create one. So we want to use our forecast content type, obviously. We could say OK, and we get some more files added to our project. So the forecast list is built up of a bunch of files. The ASPX files that you see here are the forms that are defined for this list. So for example, the edit form, the new form, the all items view, and so on. But what we're really interested in are the XML files that you see in here. The first one is this instance XML file. So this defines the instance that's going to be created when this feature is deployed. So let's rename this list and call it forecasts. And we're also going to say, we want to say on quick launch is true. And this attribute means that this list will be shown in the navigation on the left-hand side. We call that the quick launch bar in SharePoint. That's all we need to do in this file. We just simply need to name it and give it any additional attributes that you want. Let's close that out. Now let's have a look at some of the other XML files. The other one that we're interested in is the schema XML file. Let me just minimize that up. Sorry, collapse that. There we go. This file, when it's expanded, looks pretty scary. But really, it's not that difficult. There's really 4 areas to this file. The content types node, the fields node, the views node, and the forms node. And so these define all of the things about this list. For example, in the content types node here, you can see we have our content type reference to the content type that we picked during that wizard. So it's automatically going to wire up the content type that we picked to this list. Now this big horrible number here is the content type ID that was defined for that content type. It was automatically created as part of the content type, and it's using that in here to reference it. The only thing that we really want to do in this file is configure some of our views for this list. So by default, on this list you have 2 views. The second view is the most interesting one. This is the one that's used by the web part for the all items view of this list. And inside there it defines how this list is going to look. Now, the bit that we're interested in is this view fields node down the bottom here. This defines the fields that it's going to show in this view. And by default, it's only added these 2 fields here. And we want to go and replace these and add the fields that are from our content type so that they show up in our view by default. So let's go ahead and remove those and add our view fields in here. And so these simply just reference the names of the fields from our content type that we defined earlier. So what's going to happen here is when we build this, it's going to package it all up, deploy it to SharePoint, it's going to activate the feature, and we're going to get that forecast list created for us, the content type will have been deployed, the product drop-down list will be deployed, and we'll be able to go in and start filling out information in our list. Now, the last thing we need to do before we start the demo is to go in and fill out the event receiver code on our forecast content type. Because we want to go and fill out the title field, for example, we want to go and fill out the start date. So let's jump back into the content type here and go into item event receiver. So by default, we have all of the kinds of events that you can attach to commented out here, and we'll go through and uncomment the events that we're interested in and add some code for them. But first, I'm going to add some helper functions to the bottom of this file that we're going to call from our event receivers. Okay, so let's walk through this code first. Have I got that right there? Let's see. We'll figure it out when we come to build. So we have some helper functions. We have, now the main body of this event receiver is in update forecast fields. And this does the main bit of work. So what it does is the first thing it does is disable this it calls this disable event firing method. And so the last thing we want to have happen is end up in a recursive loop in our event receiver. So we disable event firing for this while we do that. And so this will stop additional events firing when we update this list. When we update this list item. Now the first things we need to do here are grab some of the data that the user filled out. For example, the forecast quantity and year, the quarter, and the product. And then we're going to use that to fill out some of the other fields. So for example, here you can see we're building the title field, which is just really a concatenation of product, quarter, and year. And then we go on to the start date, and we call our helper function calculate start date. So as I said before, this is just going to grab the first day of the month that begins the quarter. And then forecast anomaly is going to call another helper function we'll walk through, which is going to help us determine whether this forecast is within plus or minus 20% of the rolling average historical sales data. And then we're going to go and update this list item. And then finally, we're going to re-enable event firing again so that things can continue to happen. So if we jump down to anomalous forecast and take a look at that, that's going to use our WCF web service to go and get the product sales data. You can see here that we build up a new collection here of the results of get sales by quarter. And so this is going to grab all that data, and then we're going to use that data to, we're going to use a little bit of link to query that data and grab the last 3 results for this particular product over the last years, and then build up or make a decision based on the amount sold whether this forecast is anomalous or not. So you can see here that we build up the average, we get the plus or minus 20% range, and then we say if our quantity is less than that average minus the range, then it's anomalous, and if it's greater than our average plus the range, then it's also anomalous. And so this will fire when our events are updated or added. But the first thing we need to do before we do that is wire up these methods into our event stubs. So let's go and find, let's just jump up here and find our added event. Uncomment this. And let's say it is, what do we call it? Populate? No, it's called update. Update forecast fields. And we need to pass it the list item that we're working on. And so we can grab that from the properties object that was passed into this event receiver, and we can say list item is what we're interested in, and we pass that to that method. So that's for the added event, and then we also need to do that for the updated event, in case somebody goes back and updates it. Okay. Now let's try and build and see if I randomly deleted one of those brackets that I didn't mean to. Aha. Whoop. Ah, yes. I need to go and add in system.link up here. Our build is completed, and we're probably ready to test this out. Now, we're going to add a couple of breakpoints into here so that we can see how all the debugging gets wired up and works. So down on our helper function down the bottom here, we're simply going to press F9 and put a breakpoint in here. And now, when I set this as the start project and click Go, it's going to build up all of our projects, compile them, pack them up in our WSP, deploy them, activate them, and then it's going to launch a browser with, so that we can go in and try this out. And it's also going to hook Visual Studio up and attach to the correct IIS process so that we can start debugging. So you don't have to do that manually. This is on a SharePoint server, yeah. This takes a little while the first time. It's actually building and packing up some of the other projects as well. Whoops, what happened here? Aha. Okay. Our field control, our drop-down field choice didn't deploy properly. And so I think this is a hang-up from me doing a dry run earlier on this morning. So what I'm going to do is just jump out of the demo and roll forward in our Hyper-V machine just to get us past this point. We can check out this working. I ran through this earlier this morning and obviously didn't tidy up quite as well as I should have prior to my demo. So let's just flip back here for a moment, and I'll do that. This won't take a moment. This is the last thing you want to have happen in a demo. Okay. Well, what's happened is the drop-down field was deployed, and then I hadn't gone back and removed it correctly. So there was that XML file that defines the field still left in the SharePoint directory. What I should have done is rolled back my solution and removed those files out from there. Okay, it's updated it. So let's just connect again. Connect to my machine. Okay, so let's jump back into our item event receiver here and see where I actually put the breakpoints in the stubs for those event receivers. So if we mouse down in here, you can see we've got our breakpoint actually in the event receivers here. So if we start debugging, should build our solution, deploy it again, and then we should start seeing our things working correctly. Sometime before Christmas would be lovely. So it's packing this last project up, and then we should start seeing things kick off. We're going to get to these other solutions. It's actually building all of them at the same time, so that's why we're seeing that delay. Okay, so it's fired up IE. It's navigating to our site. That error was about another DLL that we're relying on, not being of a particular compilation type. Now, and you can see on the left-hand side here that our forecast list has been created for us. So now we can go into this forecast list and let's add some items and see our event receivers firing. Okay, so I've added the forecast sales data for the first 4 quarters for the alpha product already. So if we go ahead and update one of these, for example, let's change the quantity. We should see our event receiver fire. So let's change this to 35. Click OK. And you can see Visual Studio is fired up here. And you can see we've broken into the code. So previously, you would have had to do the attach manually. You'd have to figure out the right process to attach to and so on. The extensions figure all that out for you and just attach to the right IIS processes. So you can simply just put breakpoints on and carry on. Okay, so let's click F5 on that and just carry on. And you can see our quantity was updated here. You can see our anomaly fields down on the left-hand side here are being filled out for us. So this figures out, again, whether we're out of that range of the rolling average and fills that out. And you can also see over here the title field has been filled out for us, which is an aggregation of the product, quarter, and the year. Okay, so these are our event receivers firing. so we're getting that data filled out correctly when somebody adds the forecast information in there. Now, let's move on to the next part of the demo. Part 4. So adding some social aspects to our application. So what we want to do here is allow people to discuss forecasts for a particular forecast. And the way we're going to do that is using a wiki. So we're going to add a wiki to our project, and we're going to add a discuss forecast action on our content type so that it allows people to, for a particular forecast, use the little drop down on that forecast item, say discuss forecast, and it'll take them off to a page that we're going to create for that particular forecast where they can go and discuss with their colleagues. So the way we're going to do that is add a couple of things to our project. Let me just stop debugging here. The first thing we're going to add is a wiki. So we simply can say we want to add a new list definition to our project, and let's call this a forecast wiki. It's going to ask us what our base list definition is for this library. We're going to say that we want it to be a wiki page library, and we're also going to say we want you to automatically create an instance of this list. So again, it's going to add that to our project. You can see the instance XML file, the same as our forecast list. And so we're going to go back in there again, like we did with the forecast list, and just change the name to forecast wiki. And we also want to say that we want it on the quick launch bar again. And so that will deploy a wiki when we activate this feature. We don't need to do anything else to this wiki at this stage. But what we do need to add is two more things to our project. The first is that discuss forecast action to our content type. So let's go back into our forecast content type here. Forecast XML defines our content type. Let's just minimize some of these. And now down the bottom here, we need to add a snippet of XML that says, here's the particular action that I want on this content type. So let's drag that in. It's this custom action node. And really, what this does is basically say, I want to create a URL action on this content type. It'll add a menu item to that contextual menu for this list item called discuss forecast. And then this is the URL that's defined for when they click on that link, what happens. And so we're going to navigate them to this discuss forecast ASPX page that we're going to add to our solution. So what this page is going to do is when the user gets redirected to that page, it's going to look in the wiki and see if a page already exists in the wiki for our particular forecast. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create a new wiki page. And if it does exist, it's simply just going to redirect the user to that wiki page so that we don't keep recreating pages. So the way it happens is the discuss forecast will look for the list ID and item ID and the site URL for the particular forecast that was clicked. And you can see here we have these curly brackets that define certain parameters that will be passed in to the discuss forecast page. And we're going to use those to look up the pages in the wiki library. So let's save that file. One thing we just need to do here is update this registration ID with the ID of the content type. So this basically links the action to the content type that you want the action to appear on. So we make sure we do that, otherwise our action doesn't turn up for this content type. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do for this part is add in that discuss forecast page. So to do that, we're going to deploy a template file, which basically means when the solution is deployed and the feature is activated, when the solution is deployed, the template files are going to be deployed into the SharePoint file system. And we want to add some additional subfolders here to make sure it goes into the right place. So under templates, we want to say layouts. And then under there, we want to say forecasting. I forgot an E. And we want to create our ASPX page under there. So I'm going to add a new item. I'm just going to add an HTML page and just call it discuss forecast today's PX. Oop, I called it wrong. I have a spelling mistake. And so in that file, we're just going to remove the HTML. This page doesn't actually have any display, so we don't need any of that. And we just need to wire up our code behind. So to do that, we need to add a few assembly references. The first one there is obviously the SharePoint assembly reference. We need the Windows base assembly for some code that we're going to use in there. And then we want to wire this page up to our forecasting DLL that'll be deployed as part of this project. So that's where our code behind is going to lie. It's going to be compiled into that code behind file. So the next thing we need to do is add the code that's actually going to run when this page is called. So I already have that file ready. Let's add it into our project here. The discuss forecast page. And let's take a look at that. Let's save that file. Okay. So what happens in this code is that when the page runs, it's going to look at some of the query string parameters, find out which forecast item it's for. It's then going to get a reference to the site and web that we're running on. It's going to look up the forecast item that the user clicked the discuss forecast action for. And it uses the list ID, the item ID, and the site URL to do that. Then it goes and grabs the forecast year, quarter, and product from that list item. So we're going to use that to name the wiki page library, the wiki page name. So we grab the year, quarter, and product. Then we go and say, let's go and grab the wiki library. So we need to grab a reference to the wiki library so that we can then go and look for items inside it or create new items. This name parameter, so this name variable here is going to contain the name of our page for this forecast. So here we're just using product, quarter, and year again to name this page. Then what we do here is we query the forecast wiki page library for a forecast wiki page that matches that file name. So we can already see if one's been created or not. And here we're using some link to do that. Basically, if the result is null, we need to go and create a new wiki page for this forecast. So here we just say that we want to add a new file to the library. We want to set its content, and we want to send update, and that will, or we want to say update, and that will save that page to the wiki library for us. And then we construct the URL for it and simply redirect the user to it. So when the user hits this page, they'll be redirected to an existing page if it exists. And if it doesn't exist, we'll create the page and then redirect them to it. So let's just make sure everything builds here. And now let's deploy it and see what happens. So again, we're packing up the solution and going to deploy it to our server. We're not going to do the debugging on this one this time. We're just going to start using the library and see what's changed. So it's activating all of our features, and the deploy succeeded. So now when we go back to our site here, we should see the wiki library turn up under the Documents tab, under the Documents node in the Quick Launch. And then we should also see the action turn up in the Forecast library. So SharePoint is restarting after it reset IIS, after the deploy. You can see we've got our Forecast wiki turn up here. And if we go into our Forecast list, we should see that action turn up on our items. So here, let's see for product Q1, for alpha Q1, we can see Discuss Forecast action. And when we click on that, we'll be redirected to that intermediary page. It'll check the library for us. It's created a wiki page because one didn't exist, and now it's redirected us to that page. So that then we can say edit, just like a regular SharePoint wiki, and start editing it. probably not that great, but never mind. And so now when we go back into our forecast list, if we go discuss forecast on this item again, we'll simply be taken back to that existing wiki page, so you don't end up with multiples. And so the idea here is that our sales people can go in and enter their forecasts. They can decide, oh, this is an anomalous one, I need to go and chat with my friends about it, and they can use the wiki to go and do that in a collaborative way. Okay. So now let's flip back and get ready to do our last part of the presentation. So for the last part, you probably all attended the keynote, and Scott Guthrie, wonderful as he is, stole all my thunder. We're releasing the new Silverlight controls, which include some graphing or charting controls that we're going to use in the last part of this demo. So this is a new set of controls that released this week. It's up on codeplex.com/Silverlight. And as you can see up on the slide here, we have a number of controls that have been added that you can use in your Silverlight applications. And the one today that we're going to use is the charting control. So we're going to use this to build a bar graph of our actual versus forecast sales data. So for example, you can see a screenshot up here of what our end result is going to look like. Now, we're going to grab our sales data again through that WCF web service. We're going to grab our forecasted sales data from our SharePoint list, and then we're going to aggregate that and use the charting control to show it in a Silverlight control on our site. So to do that, I'm going to use the two projects I already had added to this solution. Now, the first one here, Forecast Graph, this is our Silverlight application. And then our Forecast Graph web part is the web part that wraps that Silverlight application. The Forecast Graph web part is actually pretty simple. I added a new Forecast Graph web part to this solution using the web part project item template. And then that gives you a CS file, a web part file, and an XML file that define this web part. And then simply in the CS file, down here in on load, this is where we load, on create child controls, this is where we go and load that Silverlight control. So you can see here, we go and grab the current context of the web. We build using the Silverlight control ASP.NET control. We set some properties on it. So we give it a name, an ID, and we also give it the site URL to the ZAP. So you can see here that our ZAP file is going to be deployed in _layouts forecast web part forecastgraph.zap. And the way that gets deployed is using another template file like we have in the other parts of the project. So under the templates, layouts, forecast graph web part, we're deploying our ZAP. And what I normally do here is one of two things. Either a post-build step on the Silverlight project that will, once you've built the Silverlight project, will copy the ZAP file into the correct location in our web part project, so that you can simply build the first project, build the second project, and deploy it, and it will take the new ZAP from the Silverlight project. Or if you're using something like TFS, you could do something with a linked file here, so that your ZAP file ended up in both places. I usually just use a post-build step for that. Okay, so that's our graphing web part. It's fairly simple. It just wires up the Silverlight control, adds it to the controls hierarchy in the web part, and points it at our ZAP file. But really, the bulk of the work happens in the forecast graph Silverlight application. So we have this page XAML file here, and this just defines the page layout of our Silverlight control. I'll just wait for this to open. This control defines, it has a title at the top of the ZAP, and then it also has a drop-down list that's going to be populated with the products. So in the final results, you'll be able to see the Silverlight control, pick which product you're interested in graphing, and then the graph will update and show you that. The first time the designer loads, it takes a little while in my virtual machine. So you can see on the right-hand side there, we have the drop-down list. We're going to populate with those product names. When you change the drop-down list, what's going to happen is it's going to reload the forecast chart control inside the Silverlight project, and that contains our charting control. It wires up to the correct data and then shows the chart. So that all happens in this forecast chart XAML file. Let's have a look at the code behind for our page and just walk through this. So what happens when this page initializes? We need to go and get some of that legacy data. We need to get the product names, for example. And so we just simply call the sales order client to do that. Now in Silverlight, everything's kind of asynchronous, so that's why you see all of these asynchronous calls and a lot of methods. So it's going to call that WCF web service, and when the result comes back, we end up firing get products completed. So when that happens, we just need to select. We need to populate those results, obviously, and set our count to be the first one, or our selected index to be the first one. Now, when the selection changes in that drop-down list, we want to refresh our graph. We want to build it up for that new project. For that new product. And so to do that, we need to go and get the sales data by quarter for a particular product, and then wire that up to our graph. So again, it's an asynchronous call. First, we get the product sales data, and when we're done with that, we need to go and get the equivalent forecast data from SharePoint. So what happens when this first method here returns? We've got the sales data. We simply keep it in the actual sales variable here, and then we go and grab the SharePoint data. And so to do that, we need to call the SharePoint web services. Because the Silverlight control is running in the browser, we need to use the web services to get that data. And so here you can see we use this list SOAP client. We've already wired this up as another reference to the web service. That's generated a SOAP proxy for us. And then we call get list items, and we pass it a query. So you can pass it a camel query here. We won't get into camel at this point. The query in this case, we'll be here all day. But the query in this case just grabs all the list items from that list. And when that comes back, we need to do something with that data. Now, I don't know about you, but I just absolutely despise working with the SharePoint web services. Who's with me on that? Lots, a few, yeah. So the issue, for those of you who haven't had the joy and excitement of using our web services, what happens is you fire a request to them with your query, and you end up getting just a blob of data back. You end up getting a blob of XML back, and so then you have to go through and iterate through the XML that comes back, and it's usually pretty arduous. But here's a tip and trick for you. So you can use Xlink to go over that XML in a fairly simple way. So here we are grabbing, we've returned from our call to our web services, and we're using a piece of link here, or Xlink, to iterate over those and get the data out of that we need. So for example, here you can see we say from item XML in blah, 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 blah. This is to say go over our XML that was returned. And then for that XML, we want to go and we want to create a new collection of quarter product sales. And we want to grab the product name, the quantity sold, the quantity number, and the sales year. And so this will grab that data out of the XML and build up a much easier collection to use. It'll do this to list on the end, which will give us the collection that we can use and bind to our graph. So we do that query. Then we add it to the forecast sales variable that we define at the top of this page, and then that's what's going to be defined. That's what's going to be bound to our chart control. So we have the forecast sales and the actual sales. Now here we call the dispatcher.beginInvoke, and the reason why we want to do this is we want to make sure that this next piece of code runs on the UI thread in the Silverlight control, so that we can update the UI. So here we want to say, using the actual sales and the forecast data that we got, we want to create this new forecast chart control, which is our other control that we've created up here, and we need to bind that data to it and add it to the layout of our page control. So we'll add that chart to this page. Now in this forecast chart control here, this is where all of the all of the chart control is defined, all of the branding and so on. So you can see here we have this chart control. So this is one of the new Silverlight chart controls. We go through and we set some of the branding and the layout and the rendering. We also have an animation defined for our bars, so they sort of bounce and wiggle. And so all of the layout is defined in here. Now with the chart controls, there are some predefined templates that you can apply to your controls by default. We're using a bar graph in this case, but there are pie charts and so on as well. Okay, so now we have our chart being built. It gets added to our Silverlight control whenever you change the drop-down, and then the web part will show that in the site. So let's go and add. I'm not going to build and deploy that one. It's already been done. Let's go back to our home page and add this control and see what happens. We have a little bit of time. Okay, so once we've deployed this, we should see our forecast chart control show up here. Our forecast graph web part. And so that was deployed, the feature was activated, and now we can see this web part. And so when we add this to our page, let's jump out of edit mode here. You can see our Silverlight is starting to load here. It's going and calling the WCF web service. It's calling the SharePoint list, and then it's binding that data to the graph. And you can see here the bars in green are our actual sales data, and the bars in the yellow are our forecast sales data. And when we change the products, we can see, well, I haven't filled out the forecast sales data for these other products, but you can see the actual sales for those products. So let's flip back to alpha, and then you can see quickly if we go into our forecast list and change some of this data, our bar graph will be, it doesn't cache any of that data, it makes a query each time. Let's change that to 10. And when we go back to the home page, our graph should reload and you should see the new set of data. There we go. Okay, so in summary, we did some design, we extended SharePoint, we integrated some WCF data in there, we added some aspects around wikis for social computing, and we did some visualization in Silverlight. In summary, the Visual Studio extensions for WSS 1.2, the current version for Visual Studio 2008, makes it really easy to build SharePoint applications, uses best practice for packaging and WSP deployment. You get that seamless F5 debug experience, and we get all of the common SharePoint artifacts like lists and libraries and web parts and so on. You can go and get the new Silverlight 2.0 controls from codeplex.com/Silverlight. You can go and grab the code, or you can get them pre-compiled, and they're simply just DLLs you include in your project. MSSharePointDeveloper.com. Everything you saw today in the build was done on a VPC that you can download from MSSharePointDeveloper.com. That's a base WSS developer VPC. It has Visual Studio already pre-installed. It has the extensions already installed. Oh, apparently it's on your the drive that you guys got, so you don't even need to go and download that. It also has a bunch of quick starts and screencasts on how to get started with SharePoint development if you're new to SharePoint development. And you will also be able to download this solution from the SharePoint team blog over the next couple of days. I'd ask you to all fill out your session evals. Your feedback is always very important to us and would be greatly appreciated. And I'll open it up for QA. Thanks very much.